Opens with showing someone. Her name is Kathy, one of the doctors who works for this research, entering a room to meet with an artificial human named Morgan. All the movements between Kathy and Morgan are monitored by surveillance cameras. When the two sit down for lunch together, Morgan, who looks a little sad because she is not allowed to go out, suddenly jumps on the table and stabs Kathy's eye. The incident that happened quickly and suddenly made the situation a bit panicked, and two other doctors came in to separate Morgan from Kathy and immediately sedated her. Not long after the incident, a risk management consultant named Lee was assigned by the company to see the situation and the research that happened. She was greeted by Ted, the project manager who was responsible for the research on Morgan. After the meeting and introduction between Lee and Ted, which was quite awkward because of the cold and professional attitude of Lee, a few minutes later, Amy, Morgan's behavioral expert, entered Lee's room to wait for the arrival of someone who would assess Morgan's behavioral feasibility. They seemed less friendly, and tones of dislike were shown by Amy to Lee. She immediately went to explore the house that was used as their workplace and accidentally met with Skip. After that, Lee approached Kathy, who was still in a weak state in her room. Her right eye was covered with a bandage and still showed signs of injury caused by Morgan's stab. Even so, Kathy said that Morgan was a good creature and had a perfect level of emotion and continued to develop. The mistake Morgan made was Kathy's mistake, who provoked Morgan to attack her. Not wanting to waste time, Lee then met with Simon, a doctor who also worked in the research. Simon was the one who explained about the creation of Morgan. He was in the third experiment after two previous synthetic life experiments failed. Morgan grew very fast for 6 months and began to show the appearance of a teenage girl. Then Morgan's development was shown to Lee. Many things developed quickly from her emotions. Amy was very close to Morgan and treated her like a sister, when she was now allowed to meet with the residents personally, but limited by a partition. It turned out that Morgan already knew who Lee was and the purpose of her arrival. She looked very polite and charming, which made her a little impressed by her, but she was quite good at hiding her feelings. After leaving, she returned to the main house. Morgan, who was sitting alone in her room, remembered her time with Amy, where they one day walked far into the forest. Outside the boundaries of the research property, Amy made Morgan very happy and impressed because she could get to know the outside world. But that was what actually caused the disaster, because Morgan became very curious about the outside world. That night, while having dinner together, Lee met another doctor. She was named Dr. Louis Chung, who was considered Morgan's mother and was very respected by Lee for her attitude of replacing Amy so that she would not interact with Morgan anymore, so that nothing worse would happen. After dinner and talking with Louis, she saw a collection of videos of Morgan who looked active and happy before. The camera angle showed Morgan's face constantly staring at the surveillance camera. Lee went out and chatted with Skip. When they were engrossed in their conversation, unbeknownst to both of them, Amy entered the isolation building of Morgan and talked to her, after turning off the camera first. Suddenly a flashback appeared in Morgan's head, how Amy took Morgan into the forest to look for fresh air and told her about many things in the forest until Morgan finally saw a deer whose body was injured. She felt pity for the deer who was in pain, so she decided to break its neck. The next day, Morgan had a new guest, a behavioral analyst named Dr. Alan Shapiro, who would assess Morgan's behavior. Alan was supposed to sit outside Morgan's room, but he forced his way in and started talking to Morgan face to face. Some of the questions from Alan were quite disturbing to Morgan's emotions, especially after Alan asked how Morgan felt if Alan recommended that she be eliminated. Hearing that, Morgan started to shed tears. She became annoyed because Alan insisted on giving an answer, and then Morgan got angry and threw Alan hard against the wall and tore his throat. Alan's throat kept bleeding. Everyone who saw the incident panicked instantly and acted quickly to handle Morgan. They tried to enter and sedate Morgan, but she managed to escape and run outside. Morgan was covered in blood before Lee finally managed to shoot a sedative at her. When she woke up, Morgan was back in a room with her position tied to a bed. She said that she was very sorry for doing something bad and was not aware of what she had done. And there was a debate between Lee and Simon about the data that would be processed by the company. Simon actually insisted on defending Morgan, but Louis had given up and handed over the entire decision to Lee. Morgan would be eliminated. She begged Lou, even calling her mother. Morgan cried when she was injected with a sedative. In the seconds that the drug spread through Morgan's body, Louie's voice was heard and said that she had no mother. She did it on purpose to make Morgan disappointed and resigned to her death. Actually, Lou was also hurt by her own actions. She loved Morgan and had already considered Morgan as her own child. After Lou and Simon left, the people in Morgan's room were also reluctant to kill her. She acted alone and was drugged by Amy. When she woke up, she was locked in Morgan's room and heard the voice of the tablet talking to her. Morgan was not in the room. Darren, Ted, and Brenda had a plan to get Morgan out of the research facility. When Darren tried to wake Morgan up, she hit Darren's head and injected a drug into Darren's body until the man died. Not stopping there, Morgan also killed Ted by shooting his head. Only Amy survived. Then Morgan left the research facility, leaving Lee locked in the room. The next victim fell. Then Morgan killed Brenda, who was outside the house after a brief fight. Seeing all her friends killed one by one, Amy was terrified. Morgan moved into the house and eliminated Kathy with anger, and continued to increase when she heard Lou sabotaging Morgan's program. They talked to each other for a while. At the same time, Lee had found Simon, who had hanged himself in his room. Then Morgan kissed Lou's forehead for the last time before she killed Lou too. Amy stayed in the car and was very scared. So when Skip came, she panicked and hysterical. In the house, the fight could not be avoided by Lee. She faced Morgan. They both fell from the second floor and Morgan took Amy and ran away. Lee tried to chase the car driven by Morgan. The two cars pushed each other until Lee finally hit a tree. Morgan escaped again from Lee. Luckily, Skip followed them and showed the direction where Morgan and Amy went. They arrived at a lake, Morgan's destination and dream all this time. Lee lost track of Morgan, who was at the edge of the lake. Morgan's eyes sparkled. She felt very happy for a moment. She could enjoy the beauty with Amy, a happiness that could not be described at all by Morgan. For the first time, she felt alive on the water. Then Morgan saw her own reflection, when suddenly a gunshot from the rifle that Lee brought broke her calmness. In the middle of the forest, they fought brutally, trying to kill each other. But Morgan's strength was much greater. She slammed Lee until his body was impaled on a sharp wood. Amy was very scared of Morgan's very fierce behavior. She tried to stop her. That was when Morgan was distracted, and without her knowledge, Lee was behind her to attack her and plunge Morgan into the water and hold her there until Morgan ran out of breath. Both Lee and Amy thought that Morgan was dead. Lee did not hesitate in carrying out her duty. She also killed Amy, who she thought had been the source of the problem. Lee came back and Skip questioned Amy's whereabouts, but he did not get an answer, but a bullet that was released. Upon returning from the task, Morgan's program had completely stopped. The evacuation of the bodies was carried out. Meanwhile, in a luxurious room, the company's executives evaluated their artificial program. Without anyone's knowledge, Lee was also an artificial program. She was a humanoid creature, designed and programmed perfectly as a destroyer. But unlike Morgan, Lee did not have emotions. The movie ended by showing Lee doing the action of lifting her hand from the table like Morgan had done. Her eyes looked straight ahead and the movie ends. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. Because by subscribing you have supported me to make better videos. See you in the next video.